Well, hi again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 100 Yards of Football. This is our Legends edition. Along with me, Jeremiah Long, our producer and engineer. Our co-host and founder is Vincent Turner. And today, Vincent, we get to talk about two more fantastic legends that help the game of football, whether it be in high school, college, or in the pros. And today, we're first going to lead off with Larry Wilson.
One of the most toughest football players, pound for pound, that played the safety position. If you go back to the 60s, that's what I said the Jim Brown era. And Joe Namath became famous winning Super Bowl III. But from a standpoint of playing football on the defensive side of the field, safety was a position. It was the last man. And the last man that held the defense together was Larry Wilson. And I'm not going to say it, but I'm going to give you the words of a former player who said Larry Wilson was the best football player he played against. Pound for pound, tackling ability, and did everything he could to get a running back on the ground. And that was the young man out of St. Simon's Island, by the way of Syracuse University, Jim Brown. Back to you, Harper.
Very interesting. Well, we're going to talk about Larry. Before we do, let's take a quick note here, guys. This is the last week of professional volleyball here in Atlanta. The Women's Pro Volleyball Federation, featuring the Atlanta Vibe. Their last game of the season is going to be on May 4th at 6 p.m. at the Gauss South Arena in Duluth. They're going to be playing against the Omaha Supernovas. Now, the Vibe is 18-8 overall. They're 10-3 at home, and you can help pack the house. Tickets are available through the AtlantaVibe.com, through Gas South Arena, or through your favorite ticket location. Again, last week of the season, they play the Indiana Ignite on Thursday, and then they're going to play the last home game before the playoffs start on Sunday, May 4th at 6 o'clock against the Omaha Supernovas, and that is the Atlanta Vibe. Pack the house and enjoy the game. All right, Larry Frank Wilson was born on March 24th, 1938 in Rigby, Idaho, which is in the lower eastern portion of the state. It's not next to Montana, but it's pretty stinking, or Wyoming, excuse me, but it's pretty stinking close. Larry's mother died when he was 10. She had spinal meningitis. Now, I'm not sure enough about that to know whether that was a agonizing, long, slow situation where you lose somebody over an extended period of time, or whether it was fairly quick. It doesn't matter. You lose your mom when you're a young boy like that, it certainly can affect your life. Now, his dad, whose name was Whitey, was a truck driver. And anything that you know about truck drivers means that you're not making money unless you're on the road. So he was gone a lot. And Larry was responsible for helping raise his brother John, younger brother. And the two of them did just about everything together when they were growing up. But at 14, when he goes into high school, I'll tell you, Vincent, this guy was an incredible athlete. 16 letters when he was in high school. So from the time that he showed up, he was playing at the varsity level: football, basketball, baseball, and track. Unbelievable how athletic he was to earn 16 letters, but obviously in a small town growing up near Idaho Falls, that was probably one of his rival high schools that he played against, but absolutely amazing in terms of his athletic ability.
I think when you look at what Larry Wilson done, and obviously we had heartache early on in his life, he was on a mission. Now, I don't know what that mission was. I don't know if it was the National Football League or being a 3-time All-American as he was at Utah. But to earn 16 varsity letters, that is really tough to do, because you got to think about this. Once football seasons are over with, you got to go into basketball season. Once basketball season over with, you got to go into baseball season, and you're doing track at the same time. And being that he had that type of responsibility raising his younger brother, that is something that's very amazing. And that's why we say here on 100 Yards of Football, Warriors come out to play. Back to you, Hart.
Yeah, he certainly was a warrior and learned at a very early age, not only about responsibility, but just doing things right. And he was technically tasked with that, and that was a part of the reward of doing things right that everybody noticed about him, even in the obituary that I read about him. By the way, Larry died on September 17th in 2020. He was 82 years old when he passed. He was a football champion, a state champion in high school, so a very good player. He was quick enough to be able to run with the ball, and he played on the other side of the ball as a safety in that position. So all over the place. And he held 2 state records in track for the high jump and the high hurdles. He did both of those while he was at Rigby High School. His number 7 from high school was retired forever. There's a Sharpen the Axe Award, which is given to 1 offensive and 1 defensive player from Rigby High School. He's responsible and accountable for that award. There's a scholarship every year that's given away to one of the students from Rigby. Now, I'm not sure if it's a $100 scholarship, if it's $10,000 or $20,000. I don't know, but the scholarship is in Larry's name. It is for kindness, humility, and respect of your peers. In other words, other people have to vote for you to get it. So it's not just you. It's what other people consider of you. It was called Wilson Stadium up until recently. The school was relocated, Rigby High School. And when it was, the new location couldn't have the same stadium address. They kept that one. So there's a monument now. And the NFL Hall of Fame spent about $20,000 to put a monument together. And it is a hometown Hall of Famer plaque that the NFL Hall of Fame awards to each and every one of its recipients to their high school. So a lot of amazing things that are a part of that. And then I want to mention Jack Curtis and Ray Nagel, who are the 2 coaches at Utah that were responsible for bringing him to the university. They had a visit with Larry's dad one day. They sat down, they probably had a bite to eat, and Coach Curtis says, listen, I want your son to come to this university to get an education, but I also want him to play football. But if he never plays for us or in the National Football League, I want him to still be able to get the education that I want you as a dad to have for him. Well, that's all it took. Whitey Wilson wanted no more to do with any more recruiting. He goes, son, you're going there. I want you to play for that coach. And so he ends up in the mid-50s going to the University of Utah. Back then they were called the Redskins, Vincent. They didn't change their name and the mascot until a little bit later. But Larry had an impact from the very first go. From his freshman year, he was scoring touchdowns for him.
Obviously, you look at his career at Utah, and he must have been a bad man because he made 3rd-team All-American in 1960. And a lot of people don't know who's on that All-American team that he shared. Richie Lucas, quarterback at Penn State. Johnny Robinson, safety, LSU, who went on and won a Super Bowl ring with the Kansas City Chiefs. We all know about Billy Cannon, another LSU great. And then finally, Zeke Smith. This for you, Mr. Brown, War Eagle, Auburn University. He was part of all those great players on that All-American team. And, of course, Jim Moody from the University of Arkansas, Pig Sooie. So he came in with a lot of respect. And let's face reality here. Utah was a small school consideration at that time in the late 1950s and early 60s. Back to you, Harper.
Yeah, they were in the Skyline League, right? They weren't even a part of the Mountain West. It didn't exist yet back then. But 1957, the team went 6-4. He had 9 touchdowns for the Redskins that year. 58, he had 3. The team went 5-7. In 59, he had 8 rushing touchdowns and 4 receiving touchdowns. That was pretty cool for him to be invited to the East-West Shrine game. And he is registered as playing more minutes than any other. Again, the Redskins is what the nickname of the school was back in those days. They changed to the Utes. But 3rd-team All-American, as you mentioned, and 1st-team All-Skyline Conference. So congratulations to him. He averaged 5.7 yards per carry. He had over 1,200 yards in his career, and he averaged over 26.1 yards per kickoff return. Good enough to get drafted in the National Football League. Seventh round pick, in the 1960 draft by the Chicago Cardinals, who, by the way, that would be their last few weeks in Chicago. They would move to St. Louis right after that. But he was also drafted, and this happened in November. This is really the 59 draft for the 60 season. And he was drafted by the Buffalo Bills in the 1st round. And he wanted to honor that. He felt that was a better deal for him to be a 1st rounder by the Bills. And he was getting ready to sign. He hadn't yet done it. And Bill Bidwell, the owner of the Chicago Cardinals, went to visit him. And this is in Salt Lake City. And he offers him a $9,000 contract bonus that would be payable only if he made the team. So it was a conditional pick. And he ends up signing with the Cardinals, in Chicago, and they move immediately to St. Louis. His first preseason game, and back in those days, you could play sometimes 6 or 7 preseason games. They go against the Colts, and Raymond Berry torches him. That's the word that was used in the description that I met. And he felt like he was not going to even make the team. The next week, he played much better, and his coach is Chuck Drulis on the defense coordinator side. And he was considering this thing called a wildcat. That's what he called it, Wildcat Wilson. Well, that was even his nickname. But it was a safety blitz. And he started to implement that because of Larry's ability. They moved him from corner to safety. They wasn't going to play on offense anymore. And really the clock was ticking for him on an offensive. He was very average when it came to that from an NFL level. But on the defensive side, Vincent, he's turned into a guy that they never would have thought would be the talented Hall of Fame career player that he turned out to be for the Cardinals.
I give him credit for really realizing that Mr. Wilson wasn't a corner, but they realized that if we can move him all over the field and put him in the box, he can make plays. And that's what he done. And most of all, I didn't really read this, but I just put this in my mind from a common sense standpoint. He was a very good tackler. Jim Brown, I'm going to say it one more time, said that was what was so impressive about Larry Wilson. He was a very good tackler in the box. Back to you, Harper.
Yeah, he wasn't the biggest guy you're ever going to see. 6 feet, 190 pounds. And when he went to his first Pro Bowl, Y.A. Tittle, the quarterback for the New York Giants, ends up saying while they're having a practice and moving around, he goes, "Wilson, if I knew you were this small, I would never have been as scared as you as I am." So he had developed and worked on a reputation, and he was a ferocious tackler. 1960, he starts in 11 of the 14 games. He had 2 interceptions. He had 3 fumble recoveries. And in 61, he plays in the first game of the season against those same New York Giants. And Chuck Drulis draws up a safety blitz where he kind of steps down into the box. And next thing you know, he's rushing the quarterback. He had 2 sacks in that game. He had 3.5 for the year. But he got Chuck Connerly, who was the quarterback at that moment for the New York Giants, and helped the Cardinals win 21-10. He finished with a safety and 3 interceptions, as well as those 3.5 sacks. And really, the legend began, and Larry was a part of it. There was a thing in professional football called a safety blitz, and it came from a wildcat formation that his defensive coordinator came up with. In 62, he had 5 sacks, and he makes his first Pro Bowl. We mentioned a few things about that. The Cardinals, if nothing else, Vincent, they struggled. It was an organization that they get close, but no cigar, if you know what I mean. They had 9 wins in 63. He didn't have any sacks, but he had 4 interceptions, a fumble recovery, a touchdown. And in 63, he makes his first Pro Bowl and All-Pro first team. So Larry, in the very early portion of his career, was showing the rest of the league, I'm here to stay, and I'm very, very good.
Well, unfortunately, he played on some Cardinal teams that didn't really make the playoffs. Matter of fact, they made it one year, but they had to play a third place game. So technically, he never made the playoffs in his 12-year career. But the 64 team is going to always be very special in the St. Louis Cardinals organization history. Jackie Smith, John David Crow. They had a very wild quarterback at the time, Charlie Johnson, Willis Crenshaw. So if you want to go back and look at the history, Larry Wilson, I don't know his stats from that year, but that was a very good 1964 team that beat the team that won the NFL title that year, the Cleveland Browns, with Jim Brown, Paul Warfield, and Gary Collins. But most of all about Mr. Wilson, when you look at playing safety at the time, and I played a little safety when I tried to, really didn't go nowhere with it. But safety at the time, one thing, toughness, tackling ability, warrior, cast on both hands. I'm going to let you tell that story. Being a monster at the safety position, blitzing, being aggressive. That's what Larry Wilson was all about doing in the 60s. And think about this. All the great safeties they played at that time, Cliff Harris, Rick Volk, Mike Wagner, who went on ahead, played in the 70s with the Pittsburgh Steelers, Jake Anderson and Jake Scott, and Dick Anderson, they played with the Miami Dolphins. Johnny Robinson, they played with the Kansas City Chiefs. And the gentleman that I saw play in college, Van McElroy. If you're talking about a twin, Van McElroy was just a little bit bigger than Larry Wilson. He had the same type of Larry Wilson skills. This gentleman right here is what a free safety was back in the 60s. Back to you, Harper.
Yeah, well, you mentioned that 64 team, and it was kind of unusual where the West and the Eastern conferences or divisions in the National Football League, they would play each other. Cleveland was 10-3-1 that year, and just below them at 9-3-2 was St. Louis. So they were technically in second place in the division. Baltimore on the other side. Now, this isn't 64, and Baltimore had some pretty good teams back then. They were 12-2, and below them was Green Bay. So they had what's called a playoff bowl, where the two second-place teams would play for third place. So Cleveland ends up winning it all that year. They beat Baltimore, and then St. Louis wins the playoff game. But really, they only did that for a couple of years, and they didn't advance. So technically, it was a playoff game, but really in the world of, how do you get to the championship? They didn't have a chance to get in it. So it really didn't count. But they played that game on January 3rd, 1965, even though it was from the 64 season. And St. Louis wins 24-17 over Green Bay. That game was played in Miami in front of 56,218 fans. In 65, the Cardinals took a step backwards. They were 5-9. He had 6 interceptions and 1 touchdown that year. And in a game on Halloween against the New York Giants, and we throw the Giants in a lot here on this, he breaks a hand. And then a couple of plays later, he breaks his other hand. He has 2 broken hands. And instead of just taking the rest of the season off, he decides to wrap his hands up and play the following week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So this is on November 7th. Bill Nelson was the quarterback, and Bill had been quoted as saying, "I just knew it. I knew it. I knew Wilson was going to get a pick. That something was going to happen." And late in the game, Bill Nelson throws an errant pass. It goes over the head of the intended receiver. And close to cover was Larry Wilson. And he kind of catches it with his forearms. He can't do it with his hands, but he gets an interception and returns it to the 5-yard line. The Cardinals would score on the next play from 5 yards out. 66, they were 8-5. He had 10 interceptions that year, a career high for him. He led the NFL, and he was the NFL Defensive Player of the Year. Fantastic season for him there. He had at least 1 interception in 7 consecutive games that season. 67, 68, 69, 4 wins, 5 wins, 9 wins occasionally, but the brunt of the Chicago/St. Louis/Arizona Cardinals is that they had struggled year after year after year. In 72, he finally retires. He had 52 interceptions. He had 5 touchdowns, 14 fumble recoveries, 2 of those for touchdowns. He had a fantastic career, didn't he, Vincent? I mean, in terms of not winning a championship, but yet still being the epitome of what you would want from the safety position.
Listen to this stat right here. 8 straight Pro Bowls, and played in 169 played in 169 games out of 172 games. And all that losing, I hate to say it, he still went out there and played like the Cardinals were still going to try to go and win the NFL title. That's really what I respect about Larry Wilson. Outstanding football player, and as I just mentioned, all the other players that followed him at their position in the 60s, there was nobody better. And I'm going to say it one more time, and I don't care anybody get upset. Some people consider him the greatest running back in all of pro football. Jim Brown said he was the best defensive player he played against. Better than Sam Huff, better than Ray Nitschke. And one thing Jim Brown said, that Larry, as you mentioned, Harper, in his video, that he wasn't a big guy. Go look at the YouTube highlights once we finish the day with Mr. Larry Wilson here on 100 Yards of Football, and you'll see some of his tackling ability. And he seemed like he was very strong in the hands. So all I'm going to say, my final words about Larry Wilson, outstanding football player, one of the best that ever done it. Remember this guy out of Boston, Massachusetts, had a song back in the 70s when I was going into college. And as a freshman, I used to walk to the cafeteria. And I remember this guy had a Corvette back during the time. Looked like he came from money. He was a Sigma Nu. He had that song, Stroking, Stroking. Billy Squire, baby. That's what Larry Wilson done on the football field. He was stroking. Back to you, Mr. Harper, LeBel.
Well, he had a great career, 13 years. And then when he was finished, he decided he was asked to be a coach. And he went into the secondary for a single year, but he was also named the director of scouting for the Cardinals. And from 1973 to 76, he was a director of scouting. And you look at some of the players that started coming in. You had Jim Hart, you had Dan Deerdorf, Conrad Dobler, Eric Metcalf, a young Otis Anderson. There were some players that were starting offensively. The Cardinals really took off, and they were able to make the playoffs during some of those teams in the 70s. From 77 to 88, he was the director of pro personnel, and also in 77, he was named the general manager, a position that he held for 17 years there with the organization. He was then, in one of those years, in 79, he was the interim head coach. Bud Wilkinson from Oklahoma fame was fired as the head coach of the Cardinals, and he took over for that season. But in 1988, the Cardinals added the title of vice president to Larry Wilson's to his job description. In 1993, he was no longer the general manager, but he retired in 2002 as the vice president of the organization. So Larry Wilson was with the Cardinals from 1960 to 72 as a player, and up until 2002 as an executive and representative. Defensive Player of the Year in 1966, six-time All-Pro, second-team All-Pro in 1965, one time, 8 times he goes to the Pro Bowl. He was the NFL interceptions leader in 1966. He was the all-decade team of the 60s for the National Football League and the 70s. He's on the 75th and 100th anniversary team. He is a member of the Ring of Honor with the Arizona Cardinals organization, and he is also a member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Your final thoughts, Vincent, about Larry Wilson?
I always remember how well he played against the Dallas Cowboys in the late 60s against Dandy Don Meredith, a guy that was, what I want to say, a very good football player. And the respect for me goes to him. Remember this today here on 100 Yards of Football, the key point. He only played, I want to say, in one playoff game, and it wasn't even a playoff game, but he played 12 years in an organization that didn't do a lot of winning. That says enough about Larry Wilson today here on 100 Yards of Football. Back to you, Harper.
Yep, and he was an innovator. Chuck Drulis, again, the defensive coordinator for the Cardinals, was looking for somebody, the right guy, to be able to cover deep, to be able to make tackles inside the box, but also get after the quarterback. And so Larry Wilson was the first of the safety blitzers, and the Wildcat was named after him and his ability to be able to get to the quarterback. So we honor him, and we are grateful for you being a part of the show here today. Jeremiah Long has been our producer and engineer, and for Vincent Turner, myself, Harper, LeBel, we want to say thank you for tuning into 100 Yards of Football. This has been our Legends Show. We thank you for being a part of the presentation. Have a great day, everybody.